Get your ghetto ass away from my courtroom, you ignorant black officer. Eric Lawson grabbed the black woman by her throat and hurled her against the Riverside County Courthouse wall. Right outside the judge's chambers, her head cracked against the concrete, blood exploded from her nose, staining her white blouse. Officer Eric Lawson, I am Chief Denise Walker, Chief. He laughed in her face, tightening his grip on her neck. Listen to this welfare queen. You probably cannot even read, let alone run anything. You people are criminals, not chiefs. Now get your hood rat ass out before I drag you to lock up where trash like you belongs. The courtroom door burst open. Judge Walter Green stood frozen, his face white as death. Lawson, dear God, release her. Your Honor, this black woman, that black woman is Chief Denise Walker, your new police chief. She takes command. Monday, Lawson's hands dropped, every drop of blood drained from his face. The racist officer who brutalized his new boss had just signed his own death warrant and exposed a department built on lies, violence, and hate. The third-floor hallway of the Riverside Justice Center had fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly, the kind of institutional lighting that made everyone look slightly sick. It was 2:44 on a Friday afternoon, and the building hummed with the usual rhythms of justice being processed. Attorneys consulting with clients in corners, defendants waiting on benches, court officers moving between courtrooms with practiced efficiency. Denise Walker stood near a water fountain, her notepad still in her hand. She had been making observations for the past 3 hours, watching how officers interacted with the public, noting body language, listening to tone. This was day 5 of her unofficial orientation. 3 months of remote file review followed by a week of silent observation. Before her Monday swearing-in ceremony, she wanted to see the department as it really operated. Not the polished version they would present to a new chief officer, Eric Lawson, had been escorting a defendant from courtroom 4A to the holding cells. He was a big man, 6'2", with the kind of muscular build that came from serious gym time, and the posture of someone used to being obeyed. When he turned the corner and saw Denise standing there, his jaw tightened. "Move," he said. Not a request, a command. Denise looked up from her notes, meeting his eyes but not moving immediately. She was taking in the moment, the automatic aggression, the assumption of authority, the expectation of instant compliance. This was exactly the kind of interaction she had been watching for, sir. "I am just," she began. "I said move." Lawson's hand went to her shoulder, fingers digging in the defendant he was escorting, looked away, uncomfortable. Denise kept her voice level. "Officer, I am Chief Walker. I will be starting as sure you are." His grip tightened, "and I am the mayor, Uganda." She started to reach for her credentials. That is when he made his decision, the split-second judgment that would change everything. He grabbed her arm, twisted it behind her back, and slammed her against the wall. Her cheek hit the painted cinder block. The notepad clattered to the floor. "You people?" Lawson set his arm across her collarbone. "Always think you can talk your way out of everything. Always got an excuse. Always. Officer Lawson?" The voice cut through the hallway like a whip crack. Judge Walter Green had emerged from his chambers, drawn by the commotion. He was 73 years old, a 20-year veteran of the bench with silver hair and a reputation for running an orderly courtroom. What he saw made him move faster than he had in years. Lawson's face went through several emotions in rapid succession: confusion, recognition, and then something that looked like his blood draining to his feet. He released Denise immediately, stepping back as if she had suddenly become electrified. Judge Green reached them in 4 long strides. "Chief Walker, are you all right?" Denise straightened slowly, her hand going to her collarbone, where Lawson's arm had been. There would be bruises. She could already feel them forming, but her voice remained steady. "I am fine, Your Honor." The judge turned to Lawson. The officer's face had gone from red to pale in seconds. His hands hung at his sides, trembling slightly around them. Other officers had appeared, drawn by the judge's shout or some sixth sense that told them something had gone very, very wrong. "Officer Lawson, Judge Walter Green said, his voice formal, now the tone he used when reading verdicts. "I would like to properly introduce you. This is Chief Denise Walker. Formerly of the FBI's Civil Rights Division, she was appointed by the City Council 3 months ago to reform this department. She begins her official duties Monday morning." He paused, letting that sink in, at which point she will be your direct superior and the commanding officer of every sworn member of this police department. The hallway had gone completely silent. Even the usual background noise of the courthouse seemed to have stopped. Lawson opened his mouth, closed. It opened it again, and then again. "Sir, I did not know." "No," Denise said quietly, picking up her notepad from where it had fallen. "You did not know who I was, but that should not matter, should it? You did not need to know who I was to treat me with basic dignity. That is the problem." She looked at him directly then, and Lawson had to force himself not to look away this close. He could see that her eyes were dark brown, intelligent, and completely calm. Despite what had just happened, there was no fear there, just assessment, like she was a scientist and he was a particularly interesting specimen under a microscope. "Officer Lawson," Denise continued, her voice still quiet, but carrying clearly in the silent hallway. "We will discuss this on Monday. In the meantime, you are to report to Internal Affairs first thing tomorrow morning to provide a complete statement about this incident. Lieutenant Carla Jenkins will take your statement. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am." The words seemed to stick in his throat. An officer, she was already turning to leave with Judge Green. But she glanced back over her shoulder. "Do not leave town." As she walked away, Lawson stood frozen around him. Other officers were staring, some with shock, some with barely concealed horror, one or two with something that might have been satisfaction. His partner, Officer Mike Donnelly, appeared at his elbow. "Jesus Christ," Derek Donnelly whispered. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" Lawson could not answer because he was beginning to realize exactly what he had done. And in that moment, standing in the courthouse hallway with a dozen witnesses and the certainty of an internal affairs investigation looming, Eric Lawson understood that his life, as he knew it, had just ended near the elevators. A court clerk named Daniel Harris lowered his phone. He had filmed the entire encounter. His hands were shaking as he saved the video to 3 different cloud accounts he had seen. Incidents like this before, not quite as dramatic, but similar officers being aggressive, people getting hurt, complaints disappearing into bureaucratic black holes. This time he had evidence, and this time the victim had the power to do something about it. Daniel just hoped that would be enough. 3 months earlier, the City Council had met in closed executive session to discuss a crisis they could no longer ignore. The numbers told a story that was becoming impossible to hide. 2 million in police misconduct settlements. Over 5 years, excessive force complaints had tripled, while officer discipline had decreased by 40. Community protests were becoming regular occurrences. Trust between the police and the neighborhoods they served had eroded to the point where witnesses would not come forward and victims would not file complaints. The department needed more than cosmetic reform. It needed someone from outside, someone with no ties to the existing power structure, someone with a proven track record of cleaning up corrupt departments. It needed someone like Denise Walker. Her reputation had preceded her, 15 years with the FBI's Civil Rights Division, focusing on police misconduct cases. She had taken down a sheriff's department in rural Mississippi that had been systematically targeting black residents for decades. She dismantled a network of corrupt officers in a mid-sized city in Indiana who had been running protection rackets. She developed investigation methodologies that became standard practice across federal law enforcement. Her philosophy was straightforward and unwavering. Bad officers do not survive in sunlight. They need darkness and silence. And people looking the other way remove those conditions and they cannot operate. But philosophy was one thing, implementation was another. The city Denise was inheriting had problems that went deeper than a few bad officers. This was institutional, woven into training, protected by union contracts, enabled by a culture that prioritized loyalty over accountability. The 8th Precinct, where Officer Lawson worked, was known throughout the city as the Fortress. It had the highest number of use-of-force incidents, the most complaints, and the lowest rate of sustained disciplinary actions. Officers who worked there wore it like a badge of honor. Captain Leonard Price had commanded the 8th Precinct for 8 years. He was a 25-year veteran who had risen through the ranks by following one simple rule: take care of your officers and they will take care of you. What that meant in practice was a precinct where complaints disappeared, where body cameras mysteriously malfunctioned during controversial incidents, where internal investigations always seemed to find insufficient evidence. Price had a saying he liked to repeat: what happens on the street stays on the street. His officers loved him for it. The community lived in fear of what that protection enabled. Eric Lawson was a product of that culture, but he was not unique. He was one of 8 officers in the 8th Precinct who shared certain characteristics: high arrest numbers, multiple complaints, and an aggressive approach to policing that walked the line between assertive and abusive. They called themselves the real cops, the ones willing to do what was necessary, while everyone else worried about optics and public relations. Lawson's official personnel file painted the picture of a solid officer: commendations for arrests, a few minor complaints quickly resolved. 12 years of steady service. But that file was a carefully curated fiction. The reality was buried in documents that had been misfiled, complaints that had been reclassified, and investigations that had been closed before they really began. 29 complaints had been filed against Lawson over his 12-year career. Official records showed only 4 of those. 4, all had been found unfounded or not sustained. The other 25 had simply vanished, lost in a system that seemed designed to lose inconvenient truths. Lieutenant Carla Jenkins had watched this happen for years. She was one of only 3 black women in a department of 430 officers, and for the past 8 years, she had been assigned to internal affairs on paper. Her job was to investigate complaints against officers in practice. Her job had become to manage complaints to make them go away with as little damage as possible to the department's reputation and the officers involved. She had started with idealism. She had believed she could change things from within. But after the 20th case, where she documented clear misconduct only to have her recommendation overruled, after the 30th time a victim had voluntarily withdrawn their complaint following a visit from a detective after watching good officers get driven out while bad ones got protected, something in her had hardened. She could not leave. She had 2 kids and a mortgage and health insurance to worry about. But she could document. She could keep records. She could prepare for a day when someone might finally care about the truth. 3 years ago, she had rented a storage unit under her sister's name. Every case she had been ordered to bury, she photocopied first every piece of evidence she was told to lose. She kept a copy of every complaint that disappeared from official records. She preserved in her secret archive. It was insurance, and it was hope. And it was the only thing that let her sleep at night. When she heard about the courthouse incident, heard that Officer Eric Lawson had assaulted the new chief on what was supposed to be her final day of observation, Carla felt something she had not felt in years: genuine hope if Chief Denise Walker survived the inevitable pushback. If she was actually serious about reform, if she was willing to fight, then maybe finally those files in the storage unit would matter. Lawson's history was a case study in how the system protected its own. 2 years ago, he had pulled over Elena Martinez, a 28-year-old elementary school teacher, claiming he suspected her of drunk driving. She was completely sober. The breathalyzer proved it, but when she questioned why she was being stopped, Lawson had grabbed her arm and twisted it behind her back with such force that her shoulder dislocated. His report said she had been combative and resistant. The dash camera footage, which existed despite later claims that it malfunctioned, showed nothing of the sort, but that footage was logged as damaged. Before anyone could review it thoroughly, Elena filed a complaint. 3 days later, Detective Patrick Doyle visited her home. Doyle was a 15-year veteran who worked closely with Captain Leonard Price. He was friendly, sympathetic. Even he explained how these things worked, how expensive lawsuits could be. how stressful court appearances were, how these cases could drag on for years and affect her job at the school. These situations, Doyle told her, sitting in her living room with his badge visible, his voice gentle, they are complicated. Officers make split-second decisions in difficult circumstances. Sometimes things look worse than they are. Sometimes it is better to let it go and move forward with your life. Elena withdrew her complaint 2 days later. She had surgery on her shoulder. It cost $8,000 out of pocket because her insurance did not fully cover injuries. Sustained during police interaction, she still could not raise her arm above shoulder height without pain. She never filed another complaint. She taught her students to be respectful of police officers. And late at night, when her shoulder ached, she wondered how many other people had been in her situation and made the same choice she had. Marcus Clay had not had the luxury of withdrawing his complaint because he had been in jail 3 years ago when he was 19. He had been walking home from a shift at a fast food restaurant. It was almost midnight. He was tired, his feet hurt, and he was thinking about his 11-month-old daughter waiting at home. Lawson and another officer stopped him. They said he matched the description of a suspect in a robbery, a description so vague it could have applied to any young black man in a hoodie. When Marcus asked what robbery, what description, why he was being stopped, Lawson threw him against a car. The force broke Marcus's collarbone. The arrest report said Marcus had attacked first, said he had taken a swing at Lawson, said he had resisted violently and needed to be subdued. 3 witnesses gave statements contradicting this. The witnesses' statements were lost. The case went forward based on Lawson's report. Marcus's public defender advised him to take a plea deal. Assault on a police officer, reduced to resisting an arrest. Time served plus probation. Marcus refused. He knew he had not done anything wrong. He believed the truth would come out. He spent 18 months in jail awaiting trial. He lost his job. He lost his apartment. His daughter's mother, frustrated and afraid, moved to another state and got a restraining order by the time security footage from a nearby business finally surfaced. Footage that clearly showed Marcus had done nothing wrong. The damage was done. The charges were dropped. But Marcus left jail with no job, no home, no family, and a deep understanding of how little justice had to do with truth. He was 22. Now he worked odd jobs when he could find them. He avoided police like they carried a disease, and when he heard that Chief Denise Walker wanted to interview him about his case, his first instinct was to refuse. "Why should I help you?" he asked Carla Jenkins. When she tracked him down, "What changes for me?" Carla did not have a good answer to that. The truth was nothing changed. Marcus is passed, but she tried anyway. "Nothing changes what happened to you," she said. "But maybe we can stop it from happening to the next kid walking home from work." Marcus had looked at her for a long moment, then slowly nodded. Not because he believed in the system, he had learned that lesson too well, but because he remembered being 19 and believing that the truth mattered. Maybe somewhere there was still a 19-year-old kid who deserved to keep believing that the pattern Carla uncovered in her secret files was damning 55 cases over 4 years. All following similar trajectories, an aggressive encounter, often. In a neighborhood with poor camera coverage, a report that justified force by claiming resistance or threat complaints filed, and then vanishing victims who withdrew statements or could not be reached for follow-up internal investigations that concluded with insufficient evidence, were not sustained and woven through it all the same names, appearing again and again. Lawson, Doyle, Price. 3 officers who supplemented each other's reports, who backed up each other's stories, who ensured that complaints never gained traction. But it was not just them. There were records. Clerks who misfiled complaints. There were union representatives who counseled officers on how to phrase their reports. There was Victor Lowell, an attorney who specialized in defending police officers and who had represented officers in 96 misconduct cases over 5 years, cases and not a single sustained violation. Lowell's fees came from the union's legal defense fund, but he also ran a consulting firm that provided use of force, training to the department, a contract worth $280,000 a year. Captain Leonard Price sat on the committee that approved that contract. Price also received $17,000 annually in speaking fees from Lowell's firm. It was a closed loop. Money flowed from the department to Lowell's firm. Lowell defended officers who generated lawsuits. The lawsuits got settled with taxpayer money. The officers stayed on the job. The pattern continued, and the community paid the price in settlements and fear in the slow erosion of trust that came from knowing that no matter how wrong an officer's actions were, there would be no accountability. Denise had spent 3 months reviewing files remotely before arriving in the city. What she found matched patterns she had seen before: the bureaucratic architecture of impunity. But seeing it in documents was different from seeing it in person that Friday afternoon in the courthouse. When Lawson had slammed her against the wall, Denise had felt several things in quick succession: pain, professional assessment of the situation, and a cold clarity about exactly what she was up against. This was not one bad officer. This was a culture that had taught officers like Lawson that they could get away with it, that had rewarded aggression and protected abuse, that had made people like Elena Martinez and Marcus Clay and dozens of others feel like their only option was to stay silent and move on. As she left the courthouse that afternoon, her shoulder already bruising, Denise knew that Monday's swearing-in ceremony would be the beginning of the real work. Not the work of running a police department, that was the easy part. The real work would be dismantling a system that had been built over decades to protect itself from exactly this kind of scrutiny. In her temporary apartment that night, Denise reviewed her notes from the week. She documented 14 separate instances of problematic officer-citizen interactions. The courthouse incident was just the most dramatic. There had been officers who were dismissive when citizens asked questions. Officers who used their physical presence to intimidate officers whose tone conveyed contempt rather than respect, and interwoven through it all was an attitude she had seen in every corrupt department she had ever investigated. We are above the rules that apply to everyone else. Her phone rang. It was Carla Jenkins. Jenkins calling from a number. Denise did not recognize Chief Walker. Carla said without preamble, "I need to talk to you, not at the office, not on recorded lines. Somewhere private. They met at a coffee shop far from police headquarters." Carla brought a folder. Inside were summaries of cases, not the originals. Those were too risky to move, but detailed notes about what she documented. "I have 55 cases," Carla said quietly, glancing around to make sure they were not overheard, cases that were buried. "Lawson is in 26 of them, but he is not alone. There are 7 other officers with similar patterns, and it all runs through Captain Leonard Price." Denise reviewed the summaries. Each one made her jaw tighten a little more. "Why did you not come forward before? To who?" Carla's laugh was bitter internal. "Affairs reports to the deputy chief who protects Price. The union protects the officers. The city attorney settles cases to avoid publicity and officers who break the code." She trailed off, then pulled up her sleeve to show a long scar on her forearm. 2 years ago, someone slashed my tires and broke my car window. Left a note that said, "Mind your business." I reported it. The investigation went nowhere. You kept the files anyway. I could not. Not every case I buried felt like a betrayal. This was the only thing I could do that felt like resistance, I guess. Denise closed the folder. "Lieutenant Jenkins, I am restructuring internal affairs on Monday. I want you heading it. Real authority, real independence, and I want full access to your files." Carla's eyes filled with tears. She blinked back quickly. "They will retaliate against me, probably against my family. Not if we move fast enough, and not if we have evidence so overwhelming. They cannot." Denise leaned forward. "I did not come here to manage this problem. Came here to solve it. But I need people inside who are willing to fight. Are you willing?" Carla thought about every case she had been forced to close, every victim. She could not help every good officer who had left in disgust. While bad ones got protected, she thought about her kids and the world they would grow up in. And she thought about Elena Martinez's dislocated shoulder, Marcus Clay's 18 months in jail, and all the others whose names filled her secret files. Yes, she said. I am willing that night while Denise and Carla were meeting. Eric Lawson sat in the Fraternal Order of Police Lodge with Captain Leonard Price. Detective Patrick Doyle and 4 other officers who had been at the courthouse. Also present was Victor Lowell, the union lawyer who had made a career out of defending officers exactly like them. Lowell laid out the situation with professional calm. The courthouse incident is bad. If there is video, if witnesses talk, we have a serious problem. Our strategy needs to be threefold. Discredit the narrative, protect Officer Lawson's rights through the grievance process, and make Chief Walker's job as difficult as possible. She is on a mission, Price said. She is not here to run a department. She is here to tear it apart. Then we make it too difficult for her to stay, Lowell replied. City councils get nervous when new chiefs cause chaos, communities get worried when crime goes up during transitions, and juries are usually sympathetic to officers who say they made split-second decisions under pressure. Lawson had been quiet through most of the meeting, but now he spoke. I am filing a complaint against her hostile work environment. She is targeting me because of what happened. Lowell considered this. Let us hold off on that. We do not want to look reactionary. First, we need to find out if anyone filmed the incident, if there is video. We need to control it before it gets out. What none of them knew was that it was already too late for that. Daniel Harris had already backed up the video, and in 3 weeks, when he got his 3rd anonymous threat, he would decide that keeping quiet was more dangerous than speaking up. But on that Friday night, Lawson and his allies still believed they could manage this. They had managed situations like this before they had the union. They had their lawyer, they had a system that had always protected them. They did not yet understand that this time was different. This time, the person they had wronged had the authority to look into every corner they had kept. Dark, this time someone was willing to follow the evidence wherever it led. This time, the system's protection was about to become its vulnerability. Monday morning was coming, and with it, everything would change. Denise arrived at police headquarters at 6:45. Monday morning, 15 minutes before sunrise. The building was a gray concrete structure from the 1970s. Blocky and institutional, located in a part of downtown that had never quite gentrified the lobby. Smelled like old coffee and floor wax. She deliberately arrived early before the day shift began, wanting to see the building. When it was mostly empty, she wanted to understand the space before it filled with people and politics and the careful performances everyone would put in for the new chief. Her office had been cleared out over the weekend for her instructions. The previous chief's accommodations, photos, and personal items had been boxed and sent to him. In retirement, Denise wanted to start with a blank space. No inherited symbolism, no subtle message that this office belonged to someone else, and she was just borrowing it. Her first official act logged at 6:00 a.m. was to request complete personnel files for every sworn officer, all use of force reports from the past 3 years, and every pending internal affairs investigation by 7:30. When Captain Leonard Price arrived, he found a memo on his desk, asking for those materials by end of business at 7:45, when he came to Denise's office to explain why that timeline was impossible. He found her reviewing budget documents and marking them up with a red pen. Chief Walker? He said, his tone carefully respectful, but with an edge underneath. I got your memo, those files you are requesting. Some of them might take time to locate. The previous chief's filing system was inadequate, I am aware, Denise finished. That is why I am requesting complete files if documents are missing. I want to know which ones and why, if they have been lost. We will need to recreate them from backup systems. If backup systems do not exist, that is a separate problem we will address. Price shifted his weight. He was a big man, used to using his physical presence to his advantage. But Denise did not look up from her budget review, did not acknowledge the implicit intimidation. Some of those IA investigations are sensitive, he continued. Union contracts have privacy provisions. I am aware of the contract now. She did look up, and her eyes were flat and professional. I have memorized it. The chief has authority to review all investigations if the union wants to file a grievance about that. They are welcome to. But I will have those files today. Price opened his mouth to argue further, then seemed to think better of it. I will see what I can do. You will have them on my desk by 5:00 p.m. Denise corrected, Captain. Let us be clear about something. I did not come here to make friends or to preserve how things have always been done. I came here because this department has a problem, and that problem is destroying public trust. You can be part of solving that problem, or you can be part of the problem that needs solving, your choice. After he left, Denise allowed herself a small smile first shot across the bow. Let them understand that she was not going to be managed or controlled or slowly absorbed into the existing culture. The all-hands meeting was scheduled for 9:00 a.m. Denise had every 8th precinct day shift officer assembled in the precinct's community room, 40 officers packed into a space designed for 30. She wanted them uncomfortable, wanted them crowded together, wanted them to understand that the old comfortable arrangements were done. She did not waste time with pleasantries. I am Chief Denise Walker. I am not here to make friends. I am here because this department has a trust problem with the community it serves. And that puts all of you in danger when people do not trust police. They do not report crimes. They do not come forward as witnesses. They do not call for help when they need it. That makes your jobs harder and more dangerous. The room was silent. Officers sat with crossed arms, skeptical faces, a few openly hostile expressions. I am going to address what happened Friday directly, Denise continued. Officer Lawson assaulted me in the courthouse. That investigation will proceed by the book. Internal Affairs will conduct a thorough investigation, evidence will be gathered, and there will be a fair process. If you have a problem with that, if you think your commanding officer should be exempt from accountability when she is assaulted, there is the door. No one moved, but the tension in the room ratcheted up several notches. Let me be clear about something else. I have spent the past week observing operations throughout the department. I have reviewed 3 months of files and reports. What I found is a pattern of aggressive policing that crosses the line from firm to abusive in a complaint process that seems designed to make complaints disappear rather than address them. Eric Lawson sat in the back row. His jaw clenched so tight it looked painful around him. Officers exchanged glances. That ends now, Denise said. Starting today, every use of force will be documented completely. Every complaint will be investigated thoroughly. Body cameras will be functional and footage will be preserved. And if you think that is unfair, if you think that is tying your hands, then I would suggest you find a different profession. She paused. Letting that sink in, most of you became officers because you wanted to help people. You wanted to make a difference. You wanted to protect communities. That is noble work. But somewhere along the way, some of you forgot that power without accountability is just tyranny with a badge. And I am here to restore accountability. When she opened the floor for questions, there were none. Just 45 officers staring at her with expressions ranging from shock to anger, to in a few faces, something that might have been respect. As the meeting broke up, Denise watched the officers file out. She was looking for reactions, cataloging who seemed receptive, who seemed hostile, who seemed scared. Carla Jenkins caught her eye and gave a small nod. Officer Megan Foster, a 26-year-old with 3 years on the force, stopped to speak briefly, Chief. I just wanted to say. Megan glanced around to make sure no one was listening closely. Some of us think this is overdue. We are glad you are here. Thank you. Officer Foster, Denise said, I am going to need officers like you to speak up when you see problems. The culture only changes when good people stop staying silent. After Megan left, Captain Leonard Price requested a private word. He closed the office door and turned to face Denise, and now the respectful facade was gone, Chief. You just declared war on this entire precinct. No. Captain, I declared that this precinct will follow the law and department policy. If that feels like war to you, that tells me everything I need to know about how things have been run. You do not understand how policing works in this city, these neighborhoods. Captain Denise opened a file folder on her desk. I have documentation of 3 incidents from the past 2 years where you personally signed off on complaint closures without conducting any meaningful investigation. I have reports from internal affairs investigators recommending further action with your handwritten notes in the margin, saying, "Close this. I have evidence that you have been taking speaking fees from Victor Lowell's consulting firm while sitting on the committee that approves his training contracts." Price's face went red. Those fees are legal. The contract allows. I did not say they were illegal. I said they create a conflict of interest. Lowell makes money defending officers who generate misconduct complaints. You have a financial relationship with Lowell. You close investigations into those same officers. It does not matter if it is technically legal. It is wrong, and it is the kind of thing that destroys public trust. I am going to the union with this, Price said, his voice tight with anger. Please do. Denise said, I have already met with union leadership. They are aware that this administration will follow contract procedures exactly, which means documented misconduct will be disciplined according to the progressive discipline guidelines in the contract. Those guidelines exist for a reason. Captain, we are going to start using them after Price stormed out. Denise sat back in her chair and allowed herself a moment of tension release. This was the hardest part, the initial confrontation, the establishing of boundaries, the making it clear that she would not be intimidated or managed or slowly absorbed into the existing dysfunction. She had been through this before in other departments. The first weeks were always brutal. There would be pushback, there would be resistance, there would be officers who tested boundaries to see if she was serious. Some would leave, some would file grievances, some would leak to media or complain to city council members. But if she could survive the initial storm, if she could demonstrate that she was immovable on matters of principle, then eventually the culture would start to shift. Not quickly, not easily, but gradually. The key was having allies inside the system. People like Carla Jenkins, who had been waiting for someone to back them up. People like Megan Foster, who wanted to do good work, but felt constrained by a toxic culture. That afternoon, Carla came to Denise's office and closed the door. I need to show you something, Carla said, and I need your word that you will protect my identity as the source. You have it. Carla laid out the details of her storage unit, her 3 years of documentation, her secret archive of buried cases. As she talked, Denise took notes, asking clarifying questions, building a mental map of how the system had been operating. Lieutenant Jenkins, you have documented a criminal conspiracy, destruction of evidence, witness tampering, official misconduct. This is bigger than I thought. That is why I kept the files. I knew that eventually someone would care, or at least I hoped. Carla's voice was tired, Chief. They are going to know I am the source. They will retaliate not if we move fast enough, and not if we build a case so strong. They are too busy defending themselves to come after you. Denise stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city. Here is what I need you to do. Get me access to those files. Make copies of everything. Then I want you to start contacting victims, everyone you remember filing complaints that disappeared. Tell them we are conducting a comprehensive review and we want to hear their stories. Some of them will not talk. They are too scared. I know, but some will. The ones who have been waiting for someone to listen. Denise turned back to Carla, and I need you to do one more thing. I am restructuring internal affairs as of tomorrow. You are the commanding officer of IA with the rank of captain. You will report directly to me, and you will have full authority to investigate any allegation regardless of rank or political connections. Carla's eyes widened. Chief, that is, the union will fight that. Price will be furious. Let them fight. The previous structure obviously did not work. Time to try something new that evening, while Denise was still in her office reviewing personnel files. The opposition was organizing at the FOP Lodge. Eric Lawson, Leonard Price, Patrick Doyle, Victor Lowell, and a core group of 8 officers met to discuss strategy. She is moving too fast, Lowell said. Pacing the room, restructuring IA, requesting complete files promoting Jenkins. She is building a case. We need to slow her down, Price said. Make her job so difficult she gets frustrated and leaves, or we find something to discredit her. Doyle suggested background information, past cases, something we can use. Lawson had been quiet through most of the meeting, but now he spoke. What about the court clerk, the one who was filming? If that video exists, we need to know. Lowell made a note. I will make some inquiries if there is video. We need to control the narrative around it before it goes public. What they did not know was that the video was already backed up in multiple locations, and Daniel Harris was beginning to realize that his silence might be more dangerous than speaking out. But on that Monday evening, both sides were still maneuvering, still gathering strength, still preparing for the real battle that was coming in her apartment. Denise reviewed the day's events. The confrontations had gone as expected. The resistance was predictable. The path forward was clear. Even if it would be difficult, she thought about Elena Martinez's dislocated shoulder, about Marcus Clay's 18 months in jail, about all the people whose complaints had been buried, whose voices had been silenced, whose experiences with police had taught them that justice was for other people. This was why she did this work. Not for the politics or the authority or the challenge, but for them. For every person who had been taught that their dignity did not matter, that their rights were negotiable. That the system would always protect itself rather than protect them. She had 3 months of documentation, Carla's files, and a growing list of victims willing to talk. It was not enough yet, but it was a start, and tomorrow she would continue building the case day by day, file by file, witness by witness, until the evidence was so overwhelming that even a corrupt system could not ignore it. Eric Lawson had made a mistake when he slammed her against that wall. He had created a victim with power and authority, and the ability to look into every dark corner he and his colleagues had been hiding in. Now the only question was how deep the corruption went and how many people would have to fall before the department could be rebuilt into something worth believing in. Carla's storage unit was in a facility on the edge of the city, the kind of place that advertised 24-hour access and climate control, but mostly catered to people who had more possessions than Space Unit 314 was 10 feet by 10 feet, filled with filing boxes stacked 3 high each, labeled with dates and case numbers that existed nowhere in official records. Denise arrived at 7:00 a.m. on Tuesday, accompanied by 2 FBI agents she had worked with during her time in the bureau. She had called in a favor. If this case was as big as she suspected, she would need federal resources eventually better to establish those relationships. Now these are just the cases from the past 4 years, Carla explained. Pulling out the first box I could not save everything from. Before that I was too scared, too convinced I might get caught. The first case Denise reviewed was Elena Martinez. The file contained the original complaint form in Elena's handwriting, describing how Officer Lawson had dislocated her shoulder during a traffic stop. There was a copy of the medical report showing the injury. There were photos Elena had taken of the bruising, and there was the internal memo from Carla recommending further investigation, along with Captain Leonard Price's handwritten note. Complainant history of traffic violations suggests pattern of resistance close as unfounded. Elena had no history of traffic violations. That was simply a lie. The second case involved Marcus Clay. Carla had copies of the witness statements that had disappeared, 3 people who had seen Lawson throw Marcus against the car, breaking his collarbone. There was the original arrest report with its claim that Marcus had attacked first, and there was a supplemental report from Detective Patrick Doyle written 2 days after the arrest that described Marcus as having known gang affiliations. Another lie designed to make the victim seem less credible. As Denise worked through the boxes, a pattern emerged with crystalline clarity button. Each case followed a similar script first. An aggressive encounter, usually in a neighborhood with poor camera coverage. The arrest reports always justified force by claiming that the subject had been combative, resistant, or threatening. The language was often identical. suggesting officers had been trained to use specific phrases that would provide legal cover. When complaints were filed, they were assigned to Detective Patrick Doyle for investigation. Doyle's reports were filed quickly, often within 24 hours, which was impossibly fast. For a thorough investigation, his findings were always the same: insufficient evidence. Conflicting accounts, no sustained violation. Third, complainants frequently reported being visited by officers, usually Doyle or someone working with him, who suggested that pursuing the complaint would be difficult, stressful, and potentially harmful to their employment or family situation. These conversations were not documented anywhere, but victim after victim described similar experiences. If complainants persisted, evidence had a way of disappearing. Body camera footage was corrupted, witness statements were misfiled, medical records that should have been part of the investigation could not be located. And finally, Captain Leonard Price would close the case often with a notation suggesting the complainant was not credible or had a history that undermined their claims that were frequently false. Denise had seen corrupt systems before, but this was systematic in a way that suggested long practice and careful refinement. This was not a few bad officers taking advantage of a weak system. This was an actively maintained apparatus designed to protect misconduct. By the end of the first day at the storage unit, Denise had documented 55 cases following this pattern. But the deeper she dug, the more connections she found. Case No. 32 involved a young mother named Dana Brooks. 15 months ago, Lawson had responded to a noise complaint at her apartment when Dana tried to explain that the noise was coming from a different unit. Lawson had become aggressive. Her 7-year-old son had stepped between them, frightened and trying to protect his mother. Lawson had grabbed the child, claiming the boy was interfering with police business. When Dana stepped forward to shield her son, Lawson arrested her for assault on a police officer. The charges were eventually dropped, but not before Child Protective Services investigated. Based on Lawson's report, Dana had nearly lost custody. Her son, now 8, still had nightmares about police officers. In her interview with Denise and Carla, Dana broke down, describing it. He is 8 years old, she said, her voice cracking. He is 8, and he is terrified of anyone in uniform. Police officers, security guards, even the crossing guard at his school, because he watched a man with a badge hurt his mother and take her away. This was one of the moments that Denise knew would resonate. It was not abstract. It was not about policy or procedure. It was about a child who had learned to fear the people who were supposed to protect him. As Denise gathered testimony, she began mapping connections. She created a visual timeline on a large whiteboard in her office, with cases plotted by date, location, officer involved, and outcome. The pattern became stark. A4 cases over 4 years, geographic clustering in low-income neighborhoods, particularly areas with limited camera coverage, the same 8 officers appearing again and again. Lawson plus 7 others who formed his core group. Detective Doyle investigating all but 3 of the cases. Captain Leonard Price closing all 50 that Carla had documented, but there was more. Denise noticed something else in the pattern. Several incidents occurred at the same intersection, Lincoln and 3rd. It was an area with no traffic cameras, no business security cameras, nothing to contradict an officer's version of events. She requested patrol assignment records. Sure enough, Lawson and his group frequently volunteered for shifts covering that area. They were deliberately selecting locations where they could operate without oversight. The discovery that made Denise's blood run cold came on Thursday afternoon. One of the FBI agents helping with the review found an encrypted file on a shared police server. With help from an IT specialist, they accessed it. It was a database, unofficial, unconnected to any legitimate law enforcement system. It contained names, photos, and notes on 226 individuals. The notes included assessments, like known agitator, filed complaint, 2019 anti-police watch for opportunities. Elena Martinez was in the database, added 3 days before her traffic stop, the note said. Known to file complaints, use caution. Marcus Clay was listed, added 2 weeks before his arrest, the note said. Associates with problem individuals, flag for attention. Dana Brooks was there too, her entry. Added 4 days before the noise complaint incident. Said previous complaint attempt, difficult document, everything. This was not reactive policing. This was a targeting system. Officers were not just responding aggressively to situations. They were identifying individuals and creating situations. When Denise presented this finding to Carla, the lieutenant's hand shook as she reviewed the names. "This is premeditation," Carla said. "They were not just covering up misconduct, they were planning it. We need to preserve this database before anyone knows we have accessed it," Denise said, "and we need to identify everyone who contributed to it." The system log showed 8 primary contributors, including Lawson. But there were also 2 entries from Captain Leonard Price and 3 from Detective Patrick Doyle. The rot went higher and wider than even Carla had suspected. Denise's next step was to understand the financial incentives maintaining the system. Following the money revealed a network that was almost elegant in its corruption. Victor Lowell's law firm had represented officers in 96 misconduct cases over 5 years. His fees paid by the union's legal defense fund totaled $2.3 million. But Lowell also owned a consulting firm that provided use of force training to the department, a contract worth $280,000 annually. Captain Leonard Price sat on the committee that approved that contract, and Price received $17,000 per year in speaking fees from Lowell's consulting company. The incentive structure was clear. Lowell profited from defending misconduct cases and from training officers who generated those cases. Price benefited financially from maintaining a relationship with Lowell and the union's legal defense fund, funded by officer dues paid for all of it. But there was another financial trail when cases went to settlement. The city's insurance company paid out. That insurance company had raised rates 3 times in 5 years, costing taxpayers an additional $1.05 million annually. Yet disciplinary actions against officers had decreased, sending a clear message to insurance adjusters. This city protects bad officers even when it costs money. Denise compiled all of this into a comprehensive report. Fewer documented cases, 26 people in the targeting database, 5.2 million in settlements. A systematic pattern of evidence tampering and witness intimidation, financial conflicts of interest, and a culture that prioritized loyalty over accountability. At every level, she had statistical evidence, she had documentary evidence, she had witness testimony, but she knew from experience that was not enough. Systems, this entrenched, had ways of deflecting statistical analysis, claiming isolated incidents, suggesting reform procedures. What she needed was something undeniable, something that would make the community demand accountability, something that would put a human face on the statistics. She needed the video of what Lawson had done to her to become public. Daniel Harris had been living in fear for 3 weeks. After the courthouse incident, he had backed up the video, but had not decided what to do with it. Then, he had started getting texts from blocked numbers. "Saw you filming, delete it. Final warning, 2 nights ago, someone had broken into his apartment while he was at work." Nothing was stolen, but his laptop had been moved. His desk had been searched. The message was clear. "We can get to you." Daniel called the police to report. The break-in, the responding officer took a cursory report and left. Daniel knew nothing would come of it. That was when he made his decision. The threats were not going to stop. If anything, they would escalate. His only protection was making the video so public that harming him would draw more attention than it prevented. On a Thursday evening, 3 weeks after the incident, Daniel uploaded the video to 3 social media platforms. Simultaneously, he included a detailed statement. "This is Chief Denise Walker being assaulted by Officer Eric Lawson in the courthouse where I work. I filmed this on our first day, observing our justice system." She identified herself. She did not fight back. She did not raise her voice. Then we found out she is his boss. This happens all the time to people who do not have her authority. How many others has this? Officer hurt, who could not do anything about it. Hashtag justice for all. Then, he sent copies to 3 local news stations, 2 national networks, and a civil rights organization. And he called Carla Jenkins lieutenant, he said when she answered. I just released the video. They are going to know it was me." Carla's response was immediate. "Where are you right now?" "My apartment, pack a bag. I am sending officers." "You can trust to bring you somewhere safe. Do not open the door for anyone else." Within 3 hours, the video had 50,000 views. Within 12 hours, it had passed 2 million by morning. It was on every news channel, and Daniel Harris was in protective custody at a location known only to Denise, Carla, and 2 FBI agents. The video played in slow motion on news broadcasts. You could see Denise standing near the water fountain, taking notes. You could see Lawson approaching with his defendant. You could see the aggressive body language, the grab, the slam against the wall, and most damning, you could hear the audio. "Lawson, move, ma'am." "Officer, I am Chief Walker. I will be starting as Lawson." "Sure you are. You got ID." The sound of the grab, the impact against the wall, and then Lawson's voice dripping with contempt. "You people always think you can talk your way out of everything." That phrase, "you people," became the focal point. The racist undertone was unmistakable. This was not just excessive force. This was an officer treating a black woman with contempt, assuming she was lying about her identity because of her race, using violence to enforce submission. Social media erupted. #fire. Lawson trended nationally. Harsh justice for Denise became a rallying cry. But there was also #BackTheBlue, with police supporters arguing that the video did not show what happened before, that people were rushing to judgment, that good cops were being demonized. The comment sections became war zones. People analyzed the video frame by frame. Some noted that Lawson continued to press his arm against Denise's collarbone even after Judge Walter Green appeared. Others pointed out that his first instinct was not to check if she was okay, but to make excuses. Victims started coming forward publicly. Elena Martinez gave a televised interview describing her dislocated shoulder and showing her surgical scars. "He did the same thing to me," she said. "I did not have a video. I did not have power. So I just lived with it." The city's major newspaper ran a front-page article. "Chief's Assault Spotlights, Years of Complaints." The story detailed the 5.2 million in settlements. The pattern of complaints, the questions about internal affairs, investigations. By Friday morning, 1,000 people had gathered at City Hall for a rally. Community activists who had been demanding police reform for years finally felt validated. Mothers whose sons had been brutalized shared their stories, and throughout it all, the video played on large screens. Lawson's violence, Denise's composure, the inescapable evidence. The police union held a counter press conference. President Stephen Cole, flanked by officers in uniform, pushed back. "Officer Lawson made a mistake and he is being crucified for it." This video does not show the full context. We do not know what Chief Walker said or did before the camera started rolling. What we do know is that she has launched a campaign against dedicated officers, and now she is using this incident to justify it. The implication was clear. Denise had provoked the incident to manufacture a crisis that would justify her reform agenda. Some media outlets gave this narrative equal weight questions. Surround Police Chief Assault video ran one headline, "Was Chief Walker where she should have been questioned?" another. But the momentum was building. The mayor, facing intense pressure, announced a public disciplinary hearing to be held in 2 weeks. It would be open to the community, streamed online, presided over by a retired federal judge. All evidence would be presented. Both sides would have their say. Denise watched these developments from her office managing the department. While the controversy swirled around her internally, the department was fracturing. About 40% of officers believed Lawson was being scapegoated. 20% quietly supported. Denise, the remaining 40%, wanted to keep their heads down and wait for it all to blow over. Carla reported threats against herself and the other officers who had been publicly supportive of Denise. Someone spray-painted "traitor" on Denise's personal car. Daniel Harris, despite protective custody, received death threats through social media and through it all. Lawson and his allies prepared their defense, convinced they could weather this storm like they had weathered others. What they did not understand yet was that Denise was not just fighting about one incident, she was using that incident as leverage to expose the entire system. The video made people pay attention, but the real case, the one she was building methodically with Carla's files, victim testimony and documented patterns, would be what brought the system down. The public hearing was 2 pseudo-weeks away. Denise had that long to finalize her case, to line up every witness, to organize every piece of evidence into an argument, so overwhelming that even sympathetic juries could not ignore it. She worked 16-hour days reviewing files, preparing presentations, coordinating with the city attorney. She met with Elena, Marcus, Dana, and 36 other victims, preparing them for testimony, explaining what to expect, promising them that this time finally someone would listen. And she thought about what came after. Even if she won at the hearing, even if Lawson was fired and Price was disciplined and the system was exposed, reform would be a years-long process. Culture did not change overnight. But she had learned long ago that you change culture by changing consequences. Make misconduct costly, make accountability real, and gradually the culture adapts. 1 week before the hearing, Denise received an anonymous package. Inside was a USB drive containing emails between Price and Lowell, discussing strategies for managing difficult complainants. There were recorded conversations of Doyle, coaching officers on how to phrase their reports. There were financial records showing Lowell's payments to Sandra Keller, the records clerk who had misplaced so many complaints. Someone inside the system was helping someone who had been part of it, but could not stomach it anymore. Denise did not know who. She did not need to know. She just needed to use what they had given her. The architecture of corruption that had protected officers like Lawson for years was about to be displayed in full public view. Every tactic, every lie, every manipulation would be documented and explained. And when it was all laid out, when the community could see exactly how they had been failed, maybe then real change could begin. The hearing was scheduled for Friday, 2 weeks after the video went viral. In those 14 days, the city became a pressure cooker. Daily protest outside police headquarters, counter-protest, defending police media, camping out for statements. City council members receiving hundreds of calls daily. The police union threatening a vote of no confidence in Chief Walker. Community groups demanding immediate action. Denise maintained her routine: arrive early, work late, respond to no media request beyond brief written statements. She let others drive the public narrative while she focused on building an unassailable case. The day before the hearing, she met with all her witnesses one final time: Elena Martinez, Marcus Clay, Dana Brooks, and 4 others who had agreed to testify publicly. Daniel Harris, nervous but determined. Nathan Hill, the evidence technician who had finally come forward as her anonymous source. Tomorrow will be difficult, Denise told them. Victor Lowell is an excellent attorney. He will try to discredit you, to make you look unreliable, to suggest you have ulterior motives. He will bring up anything in your past that he thinks might undermine your credibility. Let him try. Donna said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. I want my son to see that sometimes people do fight back, that sometimes the truth matters. Elena nodded. I have been quiet for 2 years. Letting them get away with what they did to me was supposed to make my life easier, but it did not. It just made me complicit in what they did to everyone who came after me. Marcus was the most skeptical. I am doing this because you asked. But Chief, I have been through this system. I know how it works. Do not get your hopes up. That one hearing changes everything. You are right, Denise said. One hearing will not change everything. But it can be the beginning. It can make it impossible for people to say they did not know, and that is step 1. The hearing was held in the City Council chambers, the only public space large enough to accommodate the expected crowd, by 800 a.m. an hour. Before the scheduled start, every seat was filled. Media filled the designated press area. Community members lined the walls outside. Several hundred more watched on large screens that had been set up in the plaza. Security was intense. Everyone passed through metal detectors. Police officers in full uniform stood at every entrance. The tension in the air was almost physical. The panel consisted of 5 people: retired federal judge Helen Crawford as hearing officer, Mayor Patricia Lang, city attorney Robert Ellis, and 2 civilian review board members. This was not a criminal trial. It was an administrative hearing to determine whether Officer Eric Lawson had violated department policy, and more broadly, whether systemic problems existed in the department. Denise sat at one table with the city attorney, and Carla Jenkins at the opposite table sat Lawson. Captain Leonard Price, Detective Patrick Doyle, and Victor Lowell, Judge Helen Crawford. A stern woman in her mid-60s with steel-gray hair and a reputation for tolerating no nonsense, called the hearing to order at 9:02 a.m. "This hearing has 3 purposes," she began. First, to determine whether Officer Eric Lawson violated department policy in his interaction with Chief Denise Walker. Second, to assess whether that incident represents broader issues within the police department. Third, to make recommendations regarding discipline and reform. This is not a criminal proceeding. The standard of evidence is preponderance, more likely than not, Mr. Lowell. "Your opening statement." Lowell stood, and his opening was everything Denise expected. Smooth, sympathetic to his client, framing Lawson as a dedicated officer, caught in an impossible situation. "Officer Lawson has served this city for 12 years, has made hundreds of arrests, responded to thousands of calls, worked the most dangerous shifts in the most challenging neighborhoods on the day in question. He encountered someone in a restricted courthouse area who failed to properly identify herself. In the split-second decisions officers must make every day, he made a judgment call. Was it perfect? No. But it was not malicious. It was not criminal. And it certainly does not justify the witch hunt that Chief Walker has launched against him and his fellow officers." When Lowell sat down, City Attorney Robert Ellis stood for the city's opening. "This hearing is about accountability. It is about whether police officers are subject to the same rules as everyone else, or whether they operate in a consequence-free zone. Officer Lawson did not just use force against Chief Walker. He assaulted her after she identified herself, after she posed no threat, because he decided she needed to learn her place. That is not police work, that is abuse of power, and as we will show, it is not an isolated incident. It is part of a pattern of misconduct that has been systematically covered up for years." The first witness was Daniel Harris. He testified about filming the incident, about backing up the video, about the threatening messages he had received. Lowell's cross-examination tried to establish that Daniel had an anti-police agenda, that he had filed complaints before, that his decision to film was itself suspicious. Daniel held firm. "I filmed because I saw wrong being done. I have worked in that courthouse for 3 years. I have seen how some officers treat people this time. I had evidence." Then the video was played in full for the hearing. The room watched in silence, even having seen it dozens of times. Denise felt her jaw tighten, watching Lawson's arm across her collarbone, hearing the contempt in his voice. When it ended, Judge Crawford asked, "Chief Walker, do you wish to testify?" Denise took the stand. She described the incident calmly, professionally, without embellishment. When asked how she felt during the assault, she answered honestly, angry but also vindicated, because it confirmed what I had been seeing all week. Officers who view communities they serve with contempt, who see citizens as problems to be controlled rather than people to be protected. Lowell's cross-examination was aggressive, trying to establish that Denise had provoked the incident, that she had been in a restricted area without authorization, that she had failed to properly identify herself. "Chief Walker, is it not true you were conducting surveillance on officers without their knowledge?" "I was observing courthouse operations, which is within my authority as incoming chief." "You had advanced knowledge of Officer Lawson's record, did you not?" "I reviewed all officers' records as part of my preparation. Officer Lawson's file showed no complaints, but as we now know, that is because complaints were systematically buried. Is it not convenient that on your final day of observation, you had an incident that gave you justification for your reform agenda?" Denise looked at Lowell directly. Mr. Lowell, I did not need to manufacture a crisis your client provided. The only thing I manufactured was the willingness to do something about it, and the hearing continued. Into the afternoon, Carla Jenkins presented the statistical analysis, 84 cases following similar patterns, geographic clustering, identical report language, the suspicious disappearance of evidence. Lowell objected repeatedly. This hearing is about one incident, not a fishing expedition into department practices. Judge Crawford ruled the pattern evidence is relevant to establishing whether Officer Lawson's conduct was aberrant or systemic. I will allow it. Elena Martinez took the stand and told her story. Her voice shook, describing the shoulder dislocation, the surgery, the $80,000 in medical bills, the visit from Detective Patrick Doyle, encouraging her to drop her complaint. Lowell tried to undermine her. Ms. Martinez, you withdrew your complaint voluntarily, did you not? After I was threatened, after I was told my life would be harder if I did not. That is not voluntary. But you were in fact cited for a broken taillight that night. Were you not? Which was fixed 2 weeks before the stop. As the repair receipt shows, Officer Lawson was looking for a reason to pull me over. Marcus Clay testified next. He described being thrown against a car, his broken collarbone, 18 months in jail for charges that were eventually dropped, losing his job, losing his daughter, Mr. Clay. Lowell said, during cross-examination, you have a criminal record, do you not? No, I do not. The charges were dropped, but you were arrested. You were in custody. That is a fact, because Officer Lawson lied in his report. That is also a fact. Dana Brooks broke down on the stand describing her son's nightmares. His fear of uniforms, the way he still flinched when he saw police officers. The room was silent, except for her quiet sobbing. My son is 8 years old. She said he is so chummy, and he is terrified of the people who are supposed to protect him. Because Officer Lawson grabbed my child to prove a point to show he could, and nobody stopped him. Lowell's cross-examination of Dana was brief and careful. Even he seemed to recognize that attacking a mother, discussing her traumatized child, would backfire as the afternoon wore on. 3 more victims testified. Each story added weight, building a picture of a pattern that could not be dismissed as isolated. Incidents. Then, Nathan Hill took the stand. This was the moment Denise had been building to the insider testimony that would break open the system's inner workings. Nathan testified about being ordered to misplace evidence, about keeping secret copies of everything he was told to lose, about documenting Captain Leonard Price's direct involvement in evidence tampering. Officer Hill City Attorney Robert Ellis asked, "Why did you keep these records if you were not prepared to come forward? Because I could not live with myself if I did not. I became a police officer to protect people, not to help other officers abuse them. I kept hoping someone would care enough to ask the right questions, and finally, Chief Walker did." Lowell's cross-examination tried to paint Nathan as a disgruntled employee with a grudge, but Nathan had documentation for everything. Emails, evidence logs, recordings he had made of conversations with supervisors. As the day stretched into early evening, Detective Patrick Doyle was called to testify, and he was visibly uncomfortable, sweating. Despite the air conditioning, the city attorney walked him through his role as the primary investigator for internal affairs complaints. "Detective Doyle, you investigated 31 complaints against Officer Lawson. How many did you sustain? None. Did you interview complainants in all 31 cases? Long pause. Not in all cases. In how many cases? I would have to review my notes. Let me help you. Our review shows you interviewed complainants in 7 of 31 cases. That is less than 25%. How do you investigate a complaint without talking to the complainant?" Doyle had no good answer. The city attorney produced an email Doyle to Price. "Another complainant withdrew. That is the 4th this month. The deterrent strategy is working." The room erupted in angry murmurs. Judge Crawford gave for order. "Detective, explain what you meant by deterrent strategy." That email was taken out of context, then provide the context. Doyle could not, because there was no context that made that email acceptable. Doyle stepped down, looking defeated. Captain Leonard Price was called. The hearing had already run over its scheduled time. But Judge Crawford decided to continue into the evening session rather than break overnight. Price testified that he had acted in good faith, that he had relied on his investigators' recommendations, that he had never intentionally buried complaints. The city attorney systematically dismantled his testimony, producing email after email showing Price directing investigations to be closed. Price coaching officers on report language. Price consulting with Lowell about how to manage difficult complaints. Captain Price, you received $17,000 annually from Victor Lowell's consulting firm while sitting on the committee that approved his training contract. Did you disclose that financial relationship? It was disclosed in my annual ethics form, which is reviewed by whom? The deputy chief who reports to you. Price had no response to that. Finally, at 9:49 p.m., nearly 13 hours after the hearing began, Officer Eric Lawson took the stand. He was pale, tired, and visibly shaken by the day's testimony. His account of the courthouse incident tried to portray himself as acting in good faith. I did not hear her identify herself. Clearly, I perceived a security threat. I used appropriate force to control the situation, but the video contradicted him. Audio analysis played for the hearing showed Denise's identification was clearly audible. The city attorney walked Lawson through his career. 67 use of force incidents over 12 years. 39 complaints, identical phrasing across dozens of reports. Officer Lawson, who taught you to write reports using these specific phrases? I learned report writing in training. Which training? Victor Lowell's street survival course. Lawson glanced at Lowell, unsure how to answer. I attended that course, yes, and it included a section on report writing. Did it not? A section that taught you how to justify force in your documentation. It taught us to document accurately. Let me read from the course materials. The city attorney held up a document. Section 7 report, writing for officer safety, always include language about subjects, furtive movements, aggressive posture, or failure to comply with commands. These phrases establish legal justification for escalation. Does that sound like documenting accurately, or does it sound like creating a narrative? Lawson had no answer. The final piece of evidence was the blue database that Nathan Hill had helped uncover when its existence was revealed, a targeting list of 226 people, including victims who had filed complaints. The reaction in the chambers was audible shock. Elena Martinez, Elena. Name was shown on screen, along with her entry. Known to file complaints, use caution, added 3 days before her traffic stop. Marcus Clay's entry associates with problem individuals flagged for attention, added 2 weeks before his arrest. Dana Brooks, previous complaint attempt, difficult document. Everything. Added 4 days before the noise complaint. Officer Lawson, the city attorney asked, did you contribute to this database? It was a tool for officer safety. A tool for officer safety that targeted people who had filed complaints against police. That is not. We were just keeping track of problem individuals whose problem was that they had exercised their right to file complaints when officers violated their rights. Judge Crawford had to gavel for order 3 times as the audience reacted. Closing arguments came near midnight. The chambers were still full. No one had left, despite the late hour and the length of the hearing. Lowell's closing tried to salvage what he could, Officer. Lawson made mistakes, but he is being used as a scapegoat for systemic issues he did not create. Firing him will not fix this department. City Attorney Ellis's closing was direct. Mr. Lowell is right about one thing. Officer Lawson did not create these problems alone, but he participated in them willingly, systematically, and without remorse. This department cannot heal until it holds people accountable. All of the people, officers, supervisors, everyone who enabled this system. Judge Crawford announced she would issue her findings the next morning, giving her time to review all evidence and testimony overnight. As the hearing adjourned at 12:00 a.m., Denise watched people file out. Some looked satisfied, some angry, some simply exhausted. Elena, Marcus, and Dana sat together in the front row. Not moving yet. Carla approached Denise. That was brutal. That was necessary. Denise corrected. Now we wait, but they both knew the waiting was almost over. The evidence was overwhelming, the pattern was undeniable. The system had been forced to examine itself in public, and what it saw was not pretty 12 hours later. Judge Crawford would issue her ruling, and nothing would ever be the same. Judge Helen Crawford arrived at City Hall at 7:00 a.m. Saturday morning, she had spent the night reviewing evidence, watching video repeatedly, reading transcripts of testimony. She had made notes, crossed them out, started over. This was not a decision to be made lightly. By 8:00 a.m. She had her findings written by 9:00 a.m. The city council chambers were filling again, smaller crowd than yesterday, but still significant. Denise sat in the front row with Carla Lawson, sat with Lowell Price and Doyle, the mayor, and city council members took their seats on the dais. Judge Crawford wasted no time with preliminaries. I have reviewed all evidence presented at yesterday's hearing, along with supplemental materials provided by both parties. My findings are as follows. She read methodically, building her case point by point. First, regarding the courthouse incident, Officer Lawson violated department policy and state law in his interaction with Chief Walker. The video evidence clearly shows excessive force used against an individual who posed no threat and who had identified herself. Officer Lawson's claim that he did not hear Chief Walker's identification is contradicted by audio analysis, his subsequent actions maintaining pressure, even after Judge Green appeared, demonstrate consciousness of wrongdoing, rather than good faith. Mistake. Second, regarding the pattern evidence, the testimony and documentation presented demonstrate a systematic pattern of misconduct that goes far beyond Officer Lawson. 84 documented cases. Statistical clustering, identical report language, and the existence of a targeting database established that this was not a few bad officers, but an institutional failure. Third, regarding supervisory failure. Captain Leonard Price failed in his basic duty to investigate complaints thoroughly, to provide appropriate oversight, and to discipline when discipline was warranted. His financial relationship with the union's attorney, while perhaps technically legal, created conflicts of interest that compromised his judgment. Detective Patrick Doyle's investigations were perfunctory at best, designed to clear officers rather than determine truth. Fourth, regarding systemic issues. The evidence shows a department culture that prioritized protecting officers over protecting citizens, that viewed accountability as the enemy, rather than the foundation of public trust, and that actively worked to prevent complaints from being fairly investigated. Based on these findings, I make the following recommendations. Officer Eric Lawson, termination, effective immediately. Criminal referral to the district attorney for assault and official misconduct. Captain Leonard Price, suspension without pay, pending further investigation. Recommendation for demotion or termination. Based on findings of that investigation, Detective Patrick Doyle. Reassignment from Internal Affairs. Mandatory retraining, suspension of 30 days without pay. Department. Wide implementation of federal oversight through a consent decree, comprehensive review of all use of force policies. Complete restructuring of internal affairs with independent civilian oversight. Mandatory de-escalation training for all officers, early warning system for officers with complaint patterns, public database of all use of force incidents and disciplinary actions. I want to address something directly to this community. What was exposed in this hearing is not just about a few officers, it is about all of us. Every time we looked away when we knew something was wrong, every time we accepted the explanation that someone must have done something to deserve rough treatment, every time we prioritized order over justice. Police officers have difficult jobs, yes. But difficulty does not excuse abuse, and this department, this city has excused too much for too long. Judge Crawford sat down, her written findings, and looked directly at Lawson. Officer Lawson, I want you to understand something. You did not just assault Chief Walker that day. You assaulted the idea that police officers are public servants rather than public masters. You demonstrated exactly the attitude that destroys trust between police and communities. And you did it in a way that could not be hidden or explained away. You gave this community incontrovertible proof of what many of them had been saying for years. She turned to Denise to Chief Walker. You have a difficult road ahead. Culture does not change because of one hearing. But sunlight is the best disinfectant, and today, we have turned on a lot of lights. I wish you luck. The chambers erupted half in cheers, half in angry protests. Police union representatives walked out, community members embraced. Some crying media rushed to file stories. Lawson sat motionless, Lowell speaking urgently in his ear. Price's face was red with fury. Doyle stared at the table as Denise left the chambers. Lawson approached her. They had not spoken directly since the courthouse incident. This is not over, he said, his voice low and tight with anger. You made enemies today, real enemies. Denise looked at him evenly. No, Officer Lawson. I made it so your victims do not have to be afraid anymore. That is all that matters. Security will escort you from the building. Turn in your badge and weapon at the desk. As she walked away, Carla caught up with her. We did it. We started it, Denise corrected. The real work begins Monday outside. Community activists were already organizing. The hearing had been streamed online, and reactions were pouring in on social media. Some celebrated the accountability, others decried what they saw as persecution of police. Elena Martinez stood in the plaza, surrounded by reporters. This does not give me my shoulder back. It does not erase 2 years of silence. But maybe it means the next person will not have to stay silent. Marcus Clay spoke to a smaller group. I am glad they fired him, but firing one cop does not change the system. We need to stay vigilant. We need to keep demanding accountability. Dana Brooks held her son's hand. Reporters approached, but she shook her head. She had said what she needed to say yesterday. Today was about beginning to heal. That afternoon, the police union held an emergency press conference. President Stephen Cole announced that the union would appeal. Lawson's termination, would file grievances, challenging the disciplinary actions, would fight the federal consent decree in court. This was a kangaroo court, Cole said. Officer Lawson is being sacrificed to appease anti-police activists. We will not abandon our members. The battle was not over. It was in many ways just beginning. But something had shifted the architecture of corruption that had protected misconduct for years. Had been publicly exposed, the tactics that had worked before, intimidating victims, losing evidence, closing investigations without real scrutiny, could not work anymore because everyone was watching now. At police headquarters, Denise met with her command staff Monday morning. About a third of the faces were new officers who had requested transfers rather than work. Under her leadership, replaced by officers from other precincts or new hires. The mood was tense but not hostile. I am not going to pretend that what happened this weekend was easy or comfortable for any of you. Denise began being in law enforcement means being under scrutiny, and that scrutiny has intensified. But here's what I want you to understand. Accountability protects good officers. When bad officers get away with misconduct, it makes everyone look bad. It makes your jobs harder and more dangerous. It erodes the trust you need to do effective police work starting today. We are implementing new procedures. Every use of force will be reviewed. Every complaint will be investigated thoroughly. Body cameras will be mandatory, and footage will be preserved. We are instituting an early warning system to identify problematic patterns before they escalate, and we are creating community oversight boards with real authority. Some of you will hate these changes. Some of you will think I am handcuffing you. If you feel that way, I encourage you to think about why documentation and accountability feel like handcuffs. The officers who do not need to worry about documentation are the ones who have nothing to hide. Most of you became police officers for the right reasons. You wanted to help. You wanted to make a difference. You wanted to protect. I am here to make sure that it is still possible to create a department where good officers can do good work without being undermined by bad officers who generate mistrust and lawsuits. Questions? Officer Megan Foster raised her hand. Chief, how do we rebuild trust when half the community sees us as the enemy? Day by day, interaction by interaction, decision by decision. You rebuild trust by being worthy of it, by being fair, by admitting mistakes, by holding yourselves to high standards. It is not quick, and it is not easy. But it is the only way. The federal consent decree took effect within a week. A monitoring team from the Department of Justice began conducting assessments. Training protocols were revised, use of force policies were rewritten. Internal affairs was completely restructured with Carla as a captain reporting directly to Denise. And with civilian oversight, not everyone accepted the changes. 8 more officers retired or transferred. The union filed 14 grievances. In the first month, conservative media outlets ran stories about police being persecuted and crime increasing under anti-cop leadership. But something else was happening too. Complaint numbers actually increased, not because misconduct increased, but because people began believing complaints might actually be investigated. Officers started reporting colleagues' misconduct. They previously would have stayed silent about community groups that had been adversarial, began showing up at precinct meetings willing to engage 3 months after the hearing. Denise reviewed preliminary statistics: use of force incidents down 35%. Sustained complaints up because they were actually being investigated. Community trust polling showed movement from 23% to 31%. Still terrible, but trending in the right direction. Officer recruitment remained a challenge. Fewer people wanted to join a police force under federal monitoring. But the candidates who did apply were generally better people who understood that accountability was part of the job. Not an obstacle to it, Eric Lawson's criminal trial was set for 6 months out. Lowell would defend him, as expected. The union paid for the defense, as expected. Some media outlets would frame it as a referendum on policing. As expected, but the video existed, the pattern evidence existed, the testimony existed, and unlike previous cases that had been managed in darkness, this one would play out in full public view. Elena Martinez started speaking at community events about police accountability. She had turned her pain into advocacy. Her shoulders still hurt, but she had found purpose in making sure others did not suffer silently, like she had Marcus. Clay remained skeptical of the system, but he had agreed to serve on one of the new community oversight boards. "I do not trust it yet," he told Denise. "But I will watch it, and if you are serious about change, I will give you a chance to prove it." Donna Brooks's son was in therapy. The nightmares came less frequently. He still tensed around police officers. But his mother told Denise that recently he had waved at an officer in the grocery store. Small progress, but progress. The cost of reform was real. Denise received death threats weekly. Her car had been vandalized twice more. She had security detail. Whenever she left headquarters, Carla reported similar harassment. Officers who supported reforms were ostracized by colleagues. But the alternative, accepting that the system was unfixable, that abuse was inevitable, that power would always protect itself, was unacceptable. Late one night, 6 weeks after the hearing, Denise sat in her office reviewing implementation plans for the consent decree. Carla stopped by with coffee. "You should go home," Carla said. "You cannot work 20-hour days forever. I keep thinking about all the people we could not help, everyone who filed complaints before I got here. Everyone who suffered in silence because they knew complaining was pointless." "You cannot change the past," Carla said gently. "But you are changing the future. That has to count for something. Does it sometimes? I wonder if we just expose one small corner of a much bigger problem, if this is even making a difference. Ask Elena, ask Marcus, ask Dana. They will tell you it makes a difference." Denise nodded slowly. "Monday, we are implementing the new early warning system if it works the way it should. We will catch problematic patterns before they become Lawson-level patterns, and if officers resist, then we will document their resistance and address it. We keep pushing, Carla, that is all we can do. We keep pushing until accountability becomes normal instead of exceptional." The conversation was interrupted by Denise's phone. It was the FBI agent who had been helping with the investigation into threats against Denise and her allies. They traced several of the threatening messages to a phone registered to one of Lawson's close associates. Another officer who had already been placed on administrative leave for separate misconduct. "We have enough for charges," the agent said. "Witness. Intimidation, harassment, possibly conspiracy, more evidence that the corruption went wide and deep, more work to do, more battles to fight, but also more proof that exposing the system, forcing it into sunlight, was working." As Denise ended the call, she thought about Judge Crawford's words. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. The courthouse incident had opened a door. The hearing had shown light through it. Now the work was following that light into every corner where misconduct had hidden it. Would take years. There would be setbacks. Some battles would be lost, but for the first time in a long time. Accountability was not just a word, it was becoming a reality. 6 months after the hearing on a cold Monday morning in March, Denise arrived at headquarters to find a new recruit class touring the building. 23 men and women diverse in background and ethnicity, all wearing crisp new uniforms that still had that brand new stiffness. One of them, a young black woman named Officer Jasmine Anderson, approached Denise as the tour passed her office. Chief Walker, Jasmine's voice carried a mix of respect and nervousness. "I just wanted to say I joined because of you. Because you showed that things could be different, that police work could be about serving, not ruling." Denise studied the young officer's face, seeing the idealism there, the hope that had not yet been tested by the realities of the job. "Officer Anderson, let me tell you something important then. The badge you are wearing is a responsibility, not a license. You will see things that will make you want to take shortcuts to cover for colleagues, to accept that this is just how things are done. Do not. The moment you compromise your integrity to fit in is the moment you become part of the problem." "Yes, Mom." Jasmine stood straighter. "I will not let you down." After the recruits moved on, Denise returned to the stack of files on her desk. The work never stopped. Today's agenda included reviewing implementation reports for the consent decree meeting with Community Oversight Board, addressing a complaint filed against an officer in the 5th Precinct, and preparing testimony for Lawson's criminal trial, which was starting next week. The trial would be another public spectacle. Lowell had filed multiple motions to exclude evidence, to limit testimony. To change venue, all had been denied. The case would proceed with the video. The victim testimony, the pattern evidence, all admissible. Some legal analysts predicted an easy conviction. Others warned that juries were often sympathetic to police officers. That split-second decision-making doctrine might provide Lawson with a defense. Denise would not speculate. She would present the evidence and let the system work. That was all she could control. The statistics told a story of incremental progress. Uses of force incidents were down 42% from pre-reform levels. Community trust polling had climbed to 38%, still below 50, but trending upward. Complaints were being investigated thoroughly, with a sustained rate now at 23% compared to 3% before Denise's arrival. But numbers did not capture everything. They did not capture the veteran officer who had approached Carla last week to report a colleague's excessive force, something that would have been unthinkable a year ago. They did not capture the community meeting where residents and police officers had actually listened to each other instead of shouting. They did not capture the slow, difficult process of culture change. There were still problems, still officers who resisted reforms, still community members who had been hurt too badly to trust again. Still politicians who used police reform as a political football. The police union had eventually elected new leadership, more willing to work with Denise's administration. But tensions remained. Officers complained that body cameras and documentation requirements made their jobs harder. Community activists argued that reforms did not go far enough, that the system was still fundamentally broken. Both sides had points. This was messy, complicated work without clear solutions. Elena Martinez had become a prominent voice in police reform advocacy. She spoke at conferences, wrote op-eds, appeared on panels. Her shoulders still hurt on cold days, but she transformed her pain into purpose. "Nothing fixes what happened to me," she told a community gathering in February. But every person who files a complaint now and gets a real investigation that honors what I went through, that makes it mean something. Marcus Clay remained more skeptical. He served on the Community Oversight Board, but pushed constantly for more aggressive reforms. The system will always try to protect itself, he said at one meeting. The moment we get comfortable, the moment we stop pushing, it will slide back to old patterns. We cannot let up. He was probably right. Change required constant pressure, constant vigilance, constant willingness to call out problems. Dinah Brooks focused on her son. The therapy was helping. He had made a friend whose father was a police officer, one of the reform-minded ones, and was slowly learning that not all people in uniforms were threats. He drew a picture last week. Dana told Denise during a chance encounter at a grocery store, a police officer helping someone first time. I have seen him draw police as helpers instead of scary. It is a small thing, but it is not a small thing, Denise said. It is the whole point. Daniel Harris had returned to work at the courthouse, though he had requested a transfer to a different building. The threats had stopped after the arrest, but he remained cautious. He had been recognized in public several times, usually with thanks, occasionally with hostility. I did the right thing, he told a reporter in an interview, but I will not pretend it was easy, or that there were not costs. Sometimes doing the right thing is expensive. Nathan Hill had been promoted to sergeant, overseeing the evidence unit. His documentation of tampering had led to a broader investigation that resulted in 3 more terminations and a complete overhaul of evidence handling procedures. I spent 2 years documenting corruption because I did not know what else to do, he reflected. Turns out documentation matters, evidence matters, truth matters. Who knew? Carla Jenkins now. Captain Jenkins headed internal affairs with real authority and independence. She had hired 4 new investigators, all with backgrounds in oversight work. The backlog of uninvestigated complaints had been cleared. New complaints received thorough, prompt investigation. We are actually doing the job IA is supposed to do, she told Denise. Crazy concept, right? But Carla still received threatening messages, occasionally, still got hostile looks in the cafeteria, still had to maintain security precautions. The personal cost of fighting the system remained real. Captain Leonard Price had resigned rather than face termination proceedings. He immediately took a position as a public safety consultant for a right-wing media outlet, where he appeared regularly to criticize police reform efforts. Detective Patrick Doyle had completed his retraining and was working a desk job in records. He kept his head down, did his work, and apparently hoped everyone would forget his role in the old system. Victor Lowell still represented police officers in misconduct cases, though his consulting contract with the city had not been renewed. He had filed multiple lawsuits, challenging the consent decree, all unsuccessful so far. The federal monitor assigned to oversee reforms issued quarterly reports. The most recent one noted progress, but highlighted areas needing improvement. A recruitment of diverse candidates, retention of reform-minded officers, sustainable funding for oversight mechanisms. Reform is a marathon, not a sprint. The report concluded, this department has made significant progress, but cultural change requires years of sustained effort. That effort continued. Daily, new officers were trained in de-escalation and community policing. Existing officers were retrained with resistant officers, eventually counseled out or terminated. Community oversight boards reviewed every use of force. Incident and complaint investigation. Not every case ended satisfactorily. Some investigations could not determine what happened. Some officers accused of misconduct were exonerated because evidence was genuinely insufficient. The system was not perfect because no system operated by humans could be, but it was better measurably, demonstrably better than before. On a Friday afternoon in late March, Denise testified at Lawson's trial. She recounted the courthouse incident again calmly and without embellishment. Lowell's cross-examination tried to establish that she had been where she should not have been, that she had failed to identify herself clearly, that her reform agenda had motivated her to make an example of his client. Denise did not take the bait. She simply told the truth. Lawson had assaulted her after she identified herself. used excessive force against someone who posed no threat and demonstrated exactly the attitude that made police accountability necessary. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Elena, Marcus, and Dana all testified. The pattern evidence was admitted. The video played dozens of times for the jury. After 7 hours of deliberation, the jury found Lawson guilty of assault and official misconduct. He was sentenced to 20 months in prison and permanent bar from law enforcement. The verdict sparked reactions. Across the spectrum, police reform advocates celebrated, police unions decried it. Media outlets analyzed its implications. Denise issued a brief statement. This verdict represents accountability, not persecution. Officer Lawson violated his oath and the law. The jury held him responsible. That is how the system is supposed to work, but she knew that one verdict did not solve systemic problems. Lawson was one officer. The culture that had enabled him involved hundreds of people, making thousands of small compromises and rationalizations. Changing that culture required changing incentives, changing training, changing oversight, changing expectations. It required years of sustained pressure. Some days the progress felt glacial. Other days Denise saw moments that gave her hope. A veteran officer apologizing to a citizen after a traffic stop became heated, de-escalating instead of doubling down. A community member thanking an officer who had helped find their lost child. Trust being rebuilt interaction by interaction. A new recruit asking thoughtful questions about use of force policy instead of just accepting. That is how we do it. These moments did not make headlines, but they were the actual work of reform. Late one night, 3 weeks after Lawson's conviction, Denise sat in her office reviewing the latest implementation reports. Carla stopped by, as she often did during these late sessions. "You know what I realized?" Carla said a year ago. "I had a storage unit full of cases I could not do anything about. I have an office where we actually investigate complaints. It is almost surreal. Progress is surreal when you are used to dysfunction." Denise agreed, but it is also fragile. This only works if we keep pushing the moment we get complacent. I know the system will try to slide back. Carla sat down. But we have changed things. Structurally, body cameras or policy oversight is embedded. Early warning systems are in place. It cannot slide back as easily as before. Cannot slide back easily is not the same as cannot slide back at all, no. Carla agreed, but it is something a year ago. It was nothing now. It is something. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, two women who had fought the same battle from different positions and were now allies in the ongoing work. "I got an email yesterday," Carla said, from a woman in California who read about what we did here. She is filing a complaint against an officer in her city. And she cited our case, said it gave her hope that complaints can actually matter, one case at a time. Denise said, "That is how systems change, one person deciding to speak up, one investigator deciding to do the job right, one leader deciding accountability matters more than protecting the institution." Think we will be doing this in 10 years? I hope not. I hope in many years, this department will not need someone like me pushing constantly. I hope the culture will have shifted enough that accountability is just how things work, and if it is not. Denise smiled slightly. Then, I guess we keep pushing. She thought about the new recruit she had met that morning, about Officer Jasmine Anderson, idealistic and determined about all the people who joined law enforcement for the right reasons and then had to navigate systems that made doing the right thing difficult. The work was not finished. It would never be completely finished. There would always be officers who should not be officers, supervisors who covered for them, systems that prioritized self-protection over accountability. But the work was happening. That was the important thing. As Denise gathered her files, she paused at the window. The city stretched out below, lights flickering in the darkness. Somewhere out there, someone was having an interaction with police. Maybe it would be respectful and professional. Maybe it would not be. But now, at least, if it was not, there were mechanisms to address it. Not perfect mechanisms, not flawless oversight, but something a chance at accountability, where before there had been none that was progress. Messy, incomplete, fragile progress. But progress nonetheless. She picked up her bag and turned off the office light. Tomorrow would bring more complaints, to investigate more resistance, to overcome more incremental changes to implement. But tonight, she could acknowledge that the fight was worth it. That Elena Martinez and Marcus Clay and Dana Brooks and all the others who had found the courage to speak up had changed. Something real justice was not a moment. It was a process. It was not a verdict. It was a choice. Made every day by people willing to do the hard work of holding systems accountable. Officer Eric Lawson was one person. The system that protected him was bigger. Dismantling it took time, courage, and people willing to risk everything. For what was right, this story was not over. Stories like this never were. But today, there was one less victim tomorrow. Maybe there would be one less again, and maybe eventually there would come a day when someone like Denise Walker did not have to fight this. But until then the work continued. As Denise left headquarters, she saw Officer Jasmine Anderson and another new recruit practicing de-escalation techniques in the training yard. Even though their shift had ended, learning, preparing, trying to be the kind of officers their communities needed. Denise paused to watch them for a moment. Then she walked to her car, started the engine, and drove home through the city. She served a city slowly, painfully learning that power without accountability was tyranny, and that the badge was a responsibility, not a license. The road was long, but at least finally they were walking.